I love superhero origin stories. There's just something about them, especially when they are done right, that makes me feel good. Growing up, I'm sure a lot of you had the same experiences. Some of the best superhero movies, films, or shows weren't about epic battles or world-ending threats like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1. That scene where Peter discovers his powers for the first time and completely obliterates Flash. A moment that still lives rent-free in my mind. Couple that with him realizing he could do more stuff, those were good times. Or Superman first realizing he has super speed and outruns the train. Peak childhood right there. And Batman, we don't really talk much about Batman's origin because I don't think anyone wants to really relate with that, but maybe that's just me. But nonetheless, origin stories are what completes a character. They lay the foundation for everything that comes after, shaping how the story unfolds across years, mediums, and adaptations. But saying I love superhero stories now, that feels almost weird, because bit by bit their relevance is being chipped away, and honestly, they might be in danger of dying out. Every time there is a reboot or a new superhero movie about a character whose origins been told before, fans scream, not another origin story. And studios seeing their reaction have begun to sideline the origins of certain characters, choosing instead to tell only the story they want. But is that really the right call? Are superhero origin stories truly overdone and unnecessary, or have we been underestimating just how much they still matter? Because what we have lost in sidelining origins might just be what superhero movies need the most. But before I go yippity yappity into the world of superhero origins and why they still hit so hard, let's slow down for a sec and ask a very interesting question. What exactly is an origin story? And more specifically, what makes a superhero's origin story?
This guy Flash Thompson, he probably deserved what happened. But just because you can beat him up doesn't give you the right to. Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
At its core, an origin story is the blueprint of a character. It's the backstory that explains how they became who they are, what drives them, what shaped their moral compass, and why they make the choices they do. For regular characters, this might be straightforward, a rough childhood, a pivotal moment, a mentor figure, but for superheroes, the stakes are a tad bit bigger. The lens is way wider. A superhero origin story doesn't just tell us about their past, it explains their ideology, their sense of responsibility, and the mindset that defines them. It shows us why a person would risk their life to stop a villain, why they would wear a mask, why they would hold themselves to a higher moral standard, or in some cases why they might struggle to do so. In other words, it's the emotional and psychological scaffolding that allows the audience to believe in the hero they see on screen. And here's the kicker. The origin isn't just a history lesson, it's also a promise. It tells the audience what kind of story they are stepping into. When Peter Parker gets bitten by that radioactive spider, we aren't just seeing a guy get superpowers, we are being shown that responsibility is going to be the cornerstone of his journey. When Bruce Wayne witnesses his parents' murder, we aren't just seeing a tragic backstory, we are being told that justice, obsession, and the weight of personal trauma will define every decision he makes as Batman. In a way, the origin story is the lens through which we experience every heroic act that comes after. Skip it and the superhero risks becoming a mask without a face. So unimpressive, sure, but emotionally hollow. That's why origin stories matter. They are the foundation. They are the DNA of the character, and without them, the why behind the superhuman starts to fade.
Why do we fall? So that we can learn to pick ourselves up.
So now that we have a clearer idea of what an origin story is, it's easier to see why they are so significant. You may start to understand why some superhero movies resonate more than others. It all boils down to the fact that they respect the core of the hero they're portraying. They give us a reason to care. Because without knowing who the superhero really is, there's little reason to invest in them emotionally. Origin stories work because they tap into something universal. Our sense of wonder. As kids, they ignite imaginations that's wild and untamed, and as adults, they offer something to relate to. Struggles, responsibilities, choices, and the weight of what it means to be extraordinary. There's something just endlessly compelling about watching a person move from ordinary into extraordinary, and the slow, often messy process of realizing, understanding, and managing their powers. Again, take Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1 for an example. Peter discovering his powers for the first time and clumsily beating the crap out of the Flash. I really love that scene, but It's hilarious, it's thrilling, but it also gives us that intimate window into the wonder of suddenly having abilities you never imagined. I know a lot of people who would do what Peter Parker did because they are stronger now, because they have his powers. Then in Spider-Man 2, that same Peter Parker is struggling to balance responsibility, love, and power. And we feel every ounce of that tension because the first movie laid the emotional groundwork. That's the beauty of a well-crafted origin story. The stakes feel earned. Or consider Batman Begins. Seeing Bruce Wayne's journey from the trauma of losing his parents to the disciplined training that molds him into the Dark Knight gives way to every fight and every moral decision he makes. And Iron Man 1 does something similar but in a totally different tone. Tony Stark's origin is flashy, fun, and snarky, and most especially filled with so much arrogance from him as a character, but it's rooted in the pivotal moment of captivity and forced reflection that changes him completely. Suddenly he changes for the better, and everything it does suddenly makes more sense because we have lived that transformation alongside him. They don't just show a transformation, they immerse us in it. That's why his conclusion is so earned, and that's why he's one of the best characters in the MCU. Essentially, we are thrown face first into these characters' lives, whether glamorous, tragic, or painfully human. A single life-changing event, a bite from a radioactive spider, a journey to the Himalayas, or a heart-stopping escape from terrorists reshapes them entirely. The contrast between who they were and who they become is sharp, deliberate, and utterly compelling. And it's not just about spectacle, it's about why the hero does what they do, why they fight, why they choose responsibility over revenge, why they wear a mask. That slow evolution, that origin journey is the emotional heartbeat that makes every heroic feat afterward mean something. Without it, again, a superhero risks being impressive on the surface but hollow underneath. Capable of awe-inspiring action, yes, but without the foundation that makes us care. So with all of that remarkable stuff I just said, with me just point out everything that's in my head, when did origin stories actually become a problem? When did people start thinking that we do not need this, that we do not need origin stories told anymore? And the truth is, this isn't something you can pin down to one single reason, because the shift was slow, layered, and honestly kind of inevitable. One of the biggest reasons origin stories work so well in the first place was because live-action superheroes were still a relatively new concept, especially for people who didn't read comic books or didn't grow up watching animated shows. For a lot of audiences, especially myself, these movies weren't adaptations, they were introductions. Every film had to teach you who this character was, what shaped them, and why they mattered. But as superhero movies became more common, their same strength slowly turned into fatigue. Back in the early 2000s, most superhero films were standalone entries, characters living in their own isolated universes with no shared continuity and no larger cinematic ecosystem. And because of that, reboots became the norm. Every time a studio wanted to take another shot at the character, the process reset, a new actor, a new tone, a new director, and always the same origin. And this is where origin stories started to feel less like a foundation and more like a checklist. Take The Amazing Spider-Man. It was an immediate reboot after Sam Raimi's trilogy, so close that for a lot of people it didn't feel like a fresh start, it felt like deja vu. The film wasn't bad because it told an origin story, it felt off because it told an origin story we had just lived through. Only now in a slightly more grounded, slightly more serious wrapper, or Fantastic Four, actually my bad, Fantastic, a movie that repeated an origin already told in 2005, hitting almost the same beat but somehow was worse. And then there's Batman. No disrespect, but at a certain point, seeing Bruce Wayne's parents get shot stopped feeling tragic and started feeling, overdone. This repetition created a pattern. Every reboot, every restart, every new take, same origin, same trauma, same turning point. And over time, frustration turned into misconception. Audiences didn't just grow tired of bad origin stories, they started believing we didn't just need them anymore. That's why there's now this almost celebratory reaction when a superhero movie skips the origin entirely, especially for characters like Batman, Spider-Man, or Superman. It feels like relief, like we are dodging something we have already sat through too many times. The MCU leaned into this mindset very fast, especially with Spider-Man, dropping him into the world already suited up, already active, his past hinted at rather than explored. James Gunn has openly talked about being tired of traditional origins, choosing to introduce his Superman without a full retelling, just enough exposition to orient us. The Batman skips the origin altogether and focuses on Bruce in his early years as Dark Knight. And now, more and more superhero films are following that same approach. Not because origin stories stopped to matter, but because people started confusing repetition with irrelevance. But is that really true, I ask? Is this really what we need? Can superhero films in the long run truly operate and function properly if the entire concept of origin stories is either neglected or partially sidelined. Let's first make one thing clear. Origin stories are not easy to write, especially when you consider today's audience, an audience that's more mature, more analytical, and far more critical of what they watch. Writing an origin story and telling a compelling narrative at the same time is genuinely difficult. When it's done right, it creates a masterpiece, and when it isn't, you end up with fantastic. A movie needs time to breathe, to introduce its main character, explore their powers, develop a villain, and still move the plot forward. Trying to balance all of that can be overwhelming for writers, and just as overwhelming for audiences when it's all dumped on them all at once. So yes, I understand why origin stories are often seen as a problem. But even with all that said, I still believe origin stories matter. And I know that might sound strange right now, but to me, they genuinely do.
Everybody loves a hero. People line up for them, cheer them, scream their names, and years later they'll tell how they stood in the rain for hours just to get a glimpse of the one who taught him to hold on a second longer.
Earlier I mentioned one of the core reasons we ended up with so many origin stories in the past is due to one fact: reboots. For years, writers had to rehash origins just to properly lay out who these characters were and what made this version different. But in modern times, that's not entirely the case anymore. Sure, we still get reboots here and there, and honestly, with the absolute mess the DCEU became, that was inevitable for them. But overall, we are not as reboot obsessed as we once were before. That's largely because cinematic universes are now the standard. The MCU in its early stages leaned heavily into origin stories for its main heroes: Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and as the universe grew, it relied less and less on traditional origins, except for characters audiences weren't familiar with. However, skipping Spider-Man's origin was something that genuinely troubled a lot of fans. Many people were excited because, yes, we have seen Uncle Ben die more times than we can count, so why keep forcing us to relive that moment? But here's the thing. Is an origin story just about a specific event, or is it about the meaning behind the event? If you take Uncle Ben out of Spider-Man's life entirely, what you're left with is a kid who just wants to be a superhero, just because. And that's honestly what MCU Spider-Man felt like up until No Way Home. The responsibility wasn't earned. It arrived late in a sense. Now look at Fantastic Four First Steps. It's genuinely one of the best things we've gotten this year. The Fantastic Four has never had a great track record in live action, so the MCU taking another swing at them was a massive course correction. But once again, the origin was skipped. The film sidelines those defining moments and focuses instead on already established versions of these characters, only giving us brief glimpses of how they became who they are. And while that approach is understandable and even works on the surface level, it didn't fully draw me emotionally. I get the logic. We have already seen the origins before, but those versions had their own fair share of problems due to questionable writing choices. But that's exactly even more of an issue. Fans who skipped or disliked those earlier films are still left without a truly compelling origin for this iteration of the Fantastic Four. So while skipping the origin helped establish them quickly, it may not have given audiences a strong emotional hook to latch onto. DC has taken a similar route. James Gunn's Superman reboot also skips the traditional origin, placing us in a world where Superman is already well known. And while that seems like it's throwing away the idea of an origin story entirely, the truth is, it isn't. Those elements are still there whether the movie wants to acknowledge them or not. Yes, we have seen Superman fall from space countless times across different media, but Superman isn't just defined by the fact he's an alien. His core, his growth, his values, his humanity is what makes him Superman. And even when a film tries to move past that origin, it often ends up circling back to those same foundational ideas. Which is why I think the real issue with origin stories isn't that they are repetitive or overdone, it's how they are executed. Origin stories don't have to follow a single linear path. How a writer chooses to tell one is entirely dependent on their creativity and sense of wonder, because the event itself isn't the most important part of an origin story. It's the significance of that event that best encompasses an origin. Every character has a core. Something defines who they are and motivates them to stay that way. When that core is altered, rushed, or glossed over, it creates vagueness. It strips away something essential. Instead of being invested because we understand the journey, we are just watching for the thrill. Yes, a story can be good without an origin story, but a story can also be great when we understand the character on a more fundamental level. When cheering for them actually means something. When calling them your favorite superhero carries weight. And sure, people can always go read the comics or watch older films, but those are different things entirely. If I'm drawn to a character because of a specific film, a specific actor, or a specific interpretation, then I want that version's origin. Another iteration, even with the same basic beats, won't hit the same. For Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy to work, his origin was necessary. For Nolan's Batman trilogy to work, his origin was also necessary. For Reeves' Superman to work, an origin was necessary too. What made them distinct wasn't just accuracy, it was vision. Each director approached the origin differently, shaping it to serve the story they wanted to tell. Not everyone preferred their version. Some gravitate towards Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man because he feels more energetic, others towards Snyder's Superman because he feels more introspective. And that's the point. That's the power of an origin story. That's why it matters. And when it comes to the difficulty of executing origin stories, there are solutions as well. If the concern is repetition, then reimagining is the answer. A well-crafted montage can do incredible things when done right. If a character's origin is widely known, a montage can still establish its emotional significance and set the foundation for what comes next. We also need to remember something important. These origin stories we now say are overdone were never meant to be repeated endlessly. Each iteration was designed to last, to grow into a full story over time. But the film industry is still a business, and in business, things rarely go according to plan. So when people say we don't need superhero origin stories anymore, I don't think that's entirely true. What we don't need are lazy origin stories. What we don't need are rushed checklists, recycled beats, or stories that exist only because tradition says they should. But the idea of an origin, of understanding why a character is who they are, that still matters. Because superheroes aren't just defined by their powers or their costumes or the scale of their battles. They are defined by the moment their life changed, and more importantly, how they responded to that change. Origin stories are where meaning is forged. They are where responsibility is born, where ideology takes shape, where the line between who a character was and who they become is first drawn. And when that foundation is missing, or only half formed, something feels off, even if we can't immediately explain why. So no, origin stories aren't obsolete. They are just demanding more care than ever. They ask for intention, for perspective, for reason to exist beyond we have seen this before. Because when an origin story is done right, it doesn't just introduce a superhero, it tells us why they are worth believing in. And that belief is what makes everything that comes after matter. But hey, opinions are opinions. You have yours, I have mine. Let me know what yours is in the comments. Do you still think origin stories matter or not? Or on something more fun, what is your favorite superhero origin story? Let's hear it in the comments. And just a side talk here, if you have probably been watching my videos for a while now and realize I sound more sexier than I usually do, it's cause I have a new microphone. It's not exactly the best, but I think it does the job pretty fine. At least I don't have to sound like a toad anymore. So let me know what you think about it in the comments too. And if you like this video or took anything from it, feel free to drop a like or subscribe so you don't miss any future uploads, or just to help grow the channel. It means a lot. But until next time, I'm out.